Hi everyone, my name is Nicholas and I'm from the Alternative RPG Club. I just wanted to make a quick video about some of the top tabletop RPGs I've played in 2023. Just as a way to look back at the year and all the RPGs that I've played. I think this year I might have played I did the math on this a while ago, but I think at least 25 different systems this year. Bear in mind that for this list, most of the games I mentioned here, I have experienced myself as a GM. I run like a company where I bring people through tabletop experiences. So I've asked for the forever GM life, although I have had a few sessions of some of these games as well. Typically I find that what I if I if I have a choice, I would want to play the game first and then run it, just so I can. It's an easier way for me to grasp the rules, just by being a player first and then being a GM. But that wasn't possible for a lot of these RPGs, so I kind of learned everything myself. But yeah, anyway, so take this with a grain of salt. I think you have to be cognizant of what kind of games I like to play as well, which explains what this top 10 is going to be like. I'm a big horror guy, so I think it's not a surprise for a lot of people, especially people who know me, that a lot of these games will be horror. I tend to like RPGs that are also very narrative focused. So a lot of these RPGs are going to be not super crunchy, and yeah, you're not gonna find D&D 5e in here. Okay, let's go to number 10 to start the list. Okay, number 10 is The Quiet Year. Let me just move my thing. Put here. That looks good. Okay, The Quiet Year was it's a very chill game. So I ran this initially in the first couple of months where when I started the Alternative RPG Club. Surprisingly, it got quite a lot of attention. A lot of people signed up for this game. It's a very chill game. So the idea is that the world has already ended. You and a bunch of players are you don't play a character in the game. You are just like omniscient. I guess like God in a way, where you're supposed to decide all the things that are going to happen to this civilization. So at the start of the game, the players come together and they talk about, oh, what kind of civilization is this going to be? Who are the people in it? And what are some of the features that are around this civilization and city? And then what we do after that is we draw cards from it's like a poker deck, but each card represents a certain scenario that's mapped in the rule book. So it could be something like, hey, there's a bunch of strangers that showed up in town. What do you want to do with them? And then and then the player kind of whose turn it is decides what they want to do, and they draw out something here. So yeah, it's a very collaborative game. I think it really forces players to look at RPGs in a very different way. I had a lot of fun with it. It's actually, to be honest, this is a GM-less game. There's no GM. I During those sessions, I actually played as well. The Quiet Year. Yeah, I've played this at least 2 3 times, and I think I do have some kind of a pattern to how I put things into the city. So there's always going to be like a boy band group. Don't ask me why, but it's just a thing that I tend to put into cities and things like that. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. It can be really zany. It can be very true to life as well. You have to decide as a table. Most of the tables that I ran this for, they opted for the zany kind of thing, and that's really easy. Anything goes. There were like jellyfish people, Taylor Swift cultists, things like that. It was a lot of fun. And so at the end of the game, you have this huge map that everyone has drawn on, and it tells this really crazy story. It's just a really fun thing. And the fun part is at the end, you look at the whole thing and be like, damn, what have we done? And the game also forces you, constantly reinforces the idea to you that, hey, it's not about your civilization surviving until the end, because it's not going to. You need to decide all the good things that happen here and all the bad things. And if only good things happen, then it's just kind of boring. So you as a player are really incentivized to come up with bad things that happen to the people that you've grown accustomed to and whatnot. And I think that's quite rare in an RPG. And players tend not to want bad things to happen to their characters, and I think that sometimes is a bit of a disservice, especially when you're looking to experience or tell a story during an RPG, because what is a story without tension and obstacles? So, alright, that's number 10, The Quiet Year. Number 9 is Dread. This one is surprisingly also super, super fun. I ran this at least 3-4 times during the Halloween period. So it's a RPG where the the resolution for all your actions happens with a Jenga tower. So what happens is you go through the scenario. Let's say you want to jump over like a cliff onto the other side of the cliff. You pull from the Jenga tower, and then you place that piece on top of the tower, and if it doesn't topple, you are successful. May sound easy at first, but as the game goes on, you're pulling 2, 3 at a time. It gets very precarious, and that's where the namesake of this RPG comes from, Dread, because like it's going to fall, and you can see it and you can physically feel it. So I think this RPG really generates a kind of fear and tension in people that's very palpable, and it's not always scary fear, because it's at the end of the day it's still like a Jenga tower, so there's a lot of fun involved in that kind of fear. It's anticipation as well as to if the tower is going to fall or not, and you can feel everyone hold their breath when when the tower looks like it's going to collapse, and like someone successfully pulls like 2, 3 pieces out and places it on top and it doesn't fall. You can feel everybody in the room like cheers. It's a great game, and there are no I was surprised with this RPG is that the character sheet has no numbers. There are no stats. The character sheet is a questionnaire. It's really about your building a character, as in what's the story behind your character, what are their motivations, why are they in this scenario, so on and so forth. There are a lot of free scenarios you can download for Dread online. They can range from anything from medieval times or your typical Cthulhu stuff to like sci-fi horror, but this system is very much for one shots, so you're not going to take this to a campaign and or anything like that, but it's very fun for just a one-time thing with your friends. I think it's a really good game to use to introduce your friends to the RPG genre, because it's so unique and it's so easy to play. You literally just is a Jenga tower. That's it. For people who are not super imaginative, this may be difficult because there are no set actions in the character sheet or in the game that you can take. Have at it. This one is for like people with at least a little bit of imagination, or have watched or seen horror movies before and can anticipate what their character would want to do in certain situations. But Dread, number 9. Okay, number 8, The One Ring. I hesitated putting this one on the list because I've only run it like a couple of times and I played it once. But what I really like about this is that I should preface this by saying I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings geek. I listen to some YouTube lore videos every now and then. I've seen the movies, but it's not like I've memorized the books and I know how to speak freaking Elvish or something like that. So I'm not super deep into it. I'm sure like people who are super deep into it can appreciate a lot of the aspects that are brought to the book and the locations and things like that. But for me, what really set this game apart from other fantasy RPGs was the rules for survival as well as diplomacy. There are very specific rules in this game when you travel over land from point A to point B. And I don't think in D&D 5e a lot of GMs tend to like hand wave that stuff like, oh, you cut the scene and then you're like, okay, you're like 10 miles away in another town and you skip the whole journey thing. But for the One Ring, the game is very balanced around the travel as well. You have to do it, and it gives the ranger something to do. I'm sure all the D&D people will know ranger is one of the most quote-unquote useless classes, because typically GMs don't run survival rules in D5e, but the One Ring kind of forces you to do that, and it's really fun when you are in travel mode. You have a scout, you have a guy who's like getting resources, so like your food and stuff like that. You have a front guard and rear guard. You have somebody, yeah, but every team member has like a different role that you need to fill in to make this journey successful. And I think that's cool. It gives more risk for players to move around, and you feel more attached to the world and landscape in this way, I feel, rather than just going from point A to point B. Some players may not like it because there is some micro stuff that you need to do, like your rations, calculating your encumbrance and stuff. Encumbrance is a huge part of this game because your health points affects how much encumbrance you have. If typically what happens is that if you take too many quote unquote wounds, I'm not sure how, I forgot the terminology the game used, but if you take too many wounds and it starts to overlap with your encumbrance, you have to drop some of your items if you want to carry on. Which is why I say the travel stuff is very important, because it's part of the balancing for the game. The other thing I mentioned was the political rules, the diplomacy. So a lot of the times, at least when I was running 5e, or 5e was ran for me, what I really didn't was how combat was so many roles, how many attacks you gotta do for each player, blah blah blah, and then diplomacy was just like one role, and it was just like, I don't like it, I don't want it. This game is very codified in terms of diplomacy. So the big scenes for diplomacy, let's say you're trying to convince a king to go to war, or let's say you're trying to, convince a noble to lend you some assistance and things like that. There are rules to how that happens. A character needs to do the first role of like greeting. It's like a courtesy role kind of thing. So how well you introduce yourself to the NPC, and that kind of sets how much time you have to negotiate the contract, to negotiate the terms of your verbal engagement. What do you want out of this engagement? And you need to pass like a series of checks, and yeah. So it's, if you think about it, it's like a health bar for the negotiation, and every check you do, it's an attack. It knocks off like the progress bar or fills up the progress bar, up to you, however you want to see it. But in general, that's like the way they do it. And what I tend to do is to prevent my players from just rolling diplomacy over and over again. So you can't use the same skill in the same negotiation. So it really forces the players to think outside the box and into what kind of skills they can use in this negotiation to push things forward. And it also helps that the game itself has a lot of rules for that. So there's like stuff like songs, skills like song, like how well you can perform a song. There's a lot of like knowledge, intelligence kind of roles that you can also do, like warfare and so on and so forth. So yeah, I thought that was really cool. So I think that's why I really enjoyed the One Ring, and I'm definitely looking into importing some of these rules over to other games as well. And that's the One Ring. Number 7, Cairn. Okay, so this game is super simple to run, at least for me. I think you need to let go of the idea of rules being super codified for this game to work for most GMs. If you look at the spell list for this game, there are like 100 plus spells, and they are like literally 1 or 2 sentences each. There's no range. Is it a cone? Is it a straight line? Blah blah blah. Most of the spells in this game, I think none of the spells in this game do direct damage. So it's really up to the GM to spice it up and things like that. So let me give you some examples of what spells there are in this game. So there's a spell that make your legs and arms like longer and stuff like that. I think there's one to shrink you as well. There's one that lets you talk to animals, blah blah blah. But you can see that a lot of the spells are more utilitarian. So this game isn't about a build. It's just about fantasy, a very simple fantasy RPG. You can see the character sheet here. It's 3 stats, nothing else. I think this is also another very good RPG you can use to introduce to your friends. The rulebook itself is only 24 pages. Yeah, and the rules are on 4 of them. The rest of it is like bestiary and all that kind of stuff. So honestly, I think this is great, and there's so much content for Karen as well. And I think recently it became popular because Bob the World Builder, the YouTube channel guy, also covered it. And yeah, but there's a bunch of content for it now. Let the Frog God, which is written by a friend of mine in Singapore, and Barkeep on the Borderlands is also I love it. It has such zany bars and stuff like that. And it was one of the first books that I read that made me feel like, okay, a dungeon doesn't have to be like a dungeon. A tavern could be a dungeon, because it's like a series of like really crazy encounters and things like that. And that's what I like to see. I don't really like dungeons that are just full of combat or traps. It's just boring. I don't know. Especially if your combat system is boring. Looking at you, D&D 5e. But yeah, so that's Karen. Number 6, Dragonbane. Okay, Dragonbane. Honestly, I know nothing about the world of Dragonbane, but I'm familiar with the rules. Dragonbane. What I've done with Dragonbane was to use the system to run Curse of Strahd, a very popular D&D 5e campaign, and so far it has worked wonderfully. Dragonbane is a little bit of it's definitely deadlier than D&D. The rules are a lot simpler, but it still offers you some tactical options in the game, which is one of the things I like about this game. The combat makes you think about very interesting decisions. What do I mean by this? You only get 1 action for your turn, 1 action and 1 movement. So your reaction also counts as an action. So, for example, let's say if an enemy comes to attack you, and the enemies always hit. There is no rule to hit for enemies. They always hit you. You can actually choose to dodge or parry, but that's your action. So when it comes to your turn in initiative, all you can do is try to move. So it really becomes like a risk reward kind of thing. Should I stay here and try and take the hit, or should I just take, or should I block and try and soak up some damage? And the initiative always shifts every round as well. How initiative is done is you're dealt each a poker card, and the highest number goes first. And yeah, it's just a very interesting system. It's simple, but it offers some tactics. It's not as deep as, I would say, something like D&D 5e or Pathfinder. It's still relatively easy for people to get into. I would say this is like D&D Lite, that offers that. Karen is technically also D&D Lite This is D&D Light, where the rules are definitely deeper than Karen. There's stuff like encumbrance, falling, and more options for you to do in battle with special species abilities, things like that. It's a fun system, and so far I've been enjoying it, and so have my players. I think the combat dynamic is quite fast, and yeah, players enjoy the decision making when it comes to the combat in this game without getting too gritty into the details. Alright, that's number 6. Number 5, Blades in the Dark. Alright, this game, I've spoken a lot about this game to many people, and it is one of my favorite games of all time. It's basically in this game you play as a bunch of criminals in like a steampunk, supernatural kind of setting. If you play the game Dishonored, it's basically Dishonored. And you're trying to build like your gang up, and usually that involves heisting and stealing shit, and gang fights, things like that. The system is really good at tension, building tension, which I think is the number one thing for RPGs. It's about building tension during the game, and it's codified in a way of clocks. So it's, imagine, if you haven't seen it, imagine it's like a pie chart that gradually gets shaded over time, like a pie chart equally divided into 6 parts, and every time you fail, one gets shaded. And if the whole thing gets shaded, something bad happens. It's placed in the middle of the table so everyone can see it. And yeah, it's just a really good way to keep the players on the ball and be very clear what the stakes are and how much time they have left, things like that. The system is not particularly forgiving, so it's a D6 system. A 1 to 3 is a fail, 4 to 5 partial success, and 6 is a full success. So as you can tell, your chances of getting anything done unscathed is relatively low. But what I like about this game is that it's not just that, hey, you fail and like you try to open the door and it doesn't open because you failed the roll. No, the door still opens, but maybe you alert the guards or you hurt yourself in the process, things like that. It's about failing forward. That's what I really like about the game. They pioneered a lot of great tools for GMs to use when it comes to failing forward, when it comes to building tension. And it's honestly, as a GM, I don't have to prep this game. Which is great because it's so play driven. All the consequences and everything just are, as long as you are relatively learned in the setting itself, it's easy to come up with consequences and foes and rivals and things like that get in the player's way. And a lot of the times, because the player's partial success or fail so much, there are so many things that extend this story and help you build this story. Maybe the cops that tried to catch them and failed, the next session they come back and now they have a grudge against your character and things like that. It allows these kind of things to happen, which is fantastic. I think it's really smart. One of the narrative ways that they put in the game to prevent people from just being straight up murder hobos is that there are things called spirit wardens in this game, that because when people die in this game they become spirits, and spirits basically go crazy and kill everything in sight. So it's a big deal when somebody dies in this game. People are trying to keep the demons and the spirits outside of the city. So what happens when somebody dies in this game? There's a magic tower in the middle, somewhere in the city, that rings every time somebody dies. So yeah, if you kill someone, you basically are putting everyone on red alert, which I think is great, because the easiest solution is often the least interesting solution as well, which players tend to go for. Tend to go for the easiest solution, but this game kind of prevents you from doing something like that, and it makes things really fun and unpredictable and wild, which is why I love Blades in the Dark, number 5. Okay, number 4, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. This game, what can I say about this game? I really like it. I think the problem with this game is that combat is very crunchy, unnecessarily, in my opinion. And also the IP, the name Warhammer, it carries a lot of weight behind it, for better or for worse. Warhammer, it's a very deep setting. The lore is fantastic. You have all these cool characters and gods and like magic systems and things like that. I just love the setting so much. But I also think because it's called Warhammer, people have a lot of preconceived notions about it that do not fit Warhammer Fantasy at all. The number one thing I tell people, like people misunderstand about this game when I say Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, is that they think it's a tabletop war game, which is not. Right, you're not bringing huge armies onto the battlefield. It's like any other RPG. You play one character, and you go on missions, go on quests, blah blah blah. Simple as that. The second misconception that people have about this game is that it is D&D in a Warhammer setting. It is not. It is, in fact, much closer to a game like Call of Cthulhu. You are not here in this game. You are just a regular person, and because you are a regular person, a lot of the story happens to you rather than the other way around. In D&D, you are the one making the huge decisions about the world and stuff like that. In this one, the world's kicking your ass, and you're just along for the ride. There are a lot of in the written scenarios for Warhammer Fantasy. There are a lot of very cool, unexpected quests that you pick up. Like, oh, you're supposed to go for this thing, but something crazier is happening, and you're caught up into it. Stuff like that. And I think that makes the world very believable in a way. It's funny how all these things happen to you. One, I probably shouldn't say this because it comes to spoiler territory, but I can't give you any like super solid examples. But a lot of the times in this game, there are a lot of cultists that are lurking around. You don't know who they are exactly. You're always on kind of like on the edge of your seat, which is why I say this game is a lot more Call of Cthulhu than D&D or Pathfinder. There is a combat system in this game. It's not balanced at all. It can be very dangerous for players. There are meta currencies available that help you alleviate some of that danger. But when your character becomes like high level stuff, the combat becomes a joke. And I just don't think this is a good combat game. But it is a fantastic setting, and it's very good at what it does for this kind of fantasy investigation. Like, yeah, I think this is the kind of right style to run Warhammer Fantasy. I wouldn't run it like a grand fantasy adventure. I'll run it like an investigation kind of thing because that's more fun. And the setting itself lends so much of that flavor to it. It's so unique, and that's why I like it. Number 3, Pathfinder 2e. I think this is going to surprise a lot of people who know my tastes. It is the number 3 spot, and I have repeatedly said over the course of this video that I do not like crunchy combat. But what I can appreciate about Pathfinder 2e is that it never pretends to be what it's not. D&D says it's a good blend of roleplay and combat. That's bullshit. There are no rules to support narrative in D&D 5e at all. Pathfinder never lies to me. People have told me since day one that it is a combat game, and I went in expecting a combat game, and I got a combat game that was really fun, with a lot of interesting decisions and rules. It feels like a board game, and it feels like a video game, but if that's what you want in a tabletop RPG, and I feel, based on some players, like the way they play D&D 5e, Pathfinder is more of a game for them, because your character builds can be so interesting in this game. There are so many options for you to choose in terms of talents, sorry, not talents, feats, and things like that. It's really fun to build a character in Pathfinder because of that. The min-maxing is thrown out the window because the game kind of does that for you already by capping your ability scores. That is how they balance the game, and that's why when the tools to build an encounter in Pathfinder 2e work because the math has been worked out. And that's fantastic from a DM perspective because I can just follow this formula that you gave me in the DM's guide that works. And I know that if I stick to this formula, like this fight, my players will be able to handle, or it would cost them more effort, or cost them more resources to do, blah blah blah. But as a DM, this is invaluable. D5E has done a terrible job at encounter design. The CR system makes no sense, and yeah, this is so refreshing from a DM's perspective. All the rules are there. I can just find them easily. Everything I think about doing, like, oh, how much treasure do they have? How much XP do they get from this encounter? If I'm custom building everything, is that going to be a chore? No. There's a formula for everything, which is fantastic. I just love it. Like, the rules are there. D5E is like, so much is missing from that game. And I don't understand why people like it, but that's me. The other thing I really like about Pathfinder as well is this tree action economy thing. It's really fun. It gives you a lot of options, and because the arena and the the opponents that you face are always very different, so you have to make those different choices. In Pathfinder, it's a lot more of a team game. It's not a solo game. You don't win your game at character creation like in 5e. This one is really about how you and your friends can help each other set up crits on enemies. So positioning is important, the abilities, your debuffs are important, and things like that. It's not just a one spell fix everything kind of situation, or one guy with the super OP build runs up and one hit KOs the boss and everything is fine and dandy. That doesn't happen in this game, or at least very rarely happens in this game, which is something I can really appreciate. Again, it's about driving tension, and there are a lot of tools in this game that help to accommodate that. And D&D is just not a good game for tension at all. A lot of the tools are too efficient for you to effectively build it, at least in my opinion, so not a fan. But loving Pathfinder 2e. I think one of the things that players may not like about it, when I ran this, actually I ran this quite recently, so I think there were probably some players who were like, oh, can I do this? Can I do this really cool stunt? For example, let's say I want to flip over this guy and stab him in the back and blah blah blah, and I a lot of the times as a DM for Pathfinder, you're forced to say no, because in the it would be pretty easy for you to do that because everything is abstract in a way and it's made to be cinematic and fun. In Pathfinder, everything is very codified. If you want to flip over somebody and stab in the back, there's probably a feat for it. And if you don't have that feat, you can't do it. And if you allow your players to like just do whatever the hell they want, then what's the point of them building a character and like spending experience points on feats? One of my players, this joke when I was running Pathfinder, it was like, hey, you should get a t-shirt that says that's probably a feat. And I think I should, because whenever my players have to ask me, hey, can I do this? And the answer is probably no, because there's probably a feat for that. And if you don't have a feat, you can't do it. But the rules in Pathfinder are very specific. It's great. And as a GM, you can just say no because rules are there. It's very clear. D&D, it's sometimes a bit muddy. Alright, that's number 3. Pathfinder 2e. Number 2, Call of Cthulhu. Alright, I really like this game. It is, I would say, one of the better games or systems to use to onboard new players who are new to RPGs as well, and if they like horror. The character sheet looks very intimidating. There's a lot of words, a lot of numbers, but honestly, you don't have to know that stuff. You know what most of that shit means. You just roll a d100. If it hits your target number or below, you pass. And 90% of the game is just that. Simple as that. There are some combat rules and things like that. The rules around auto fire are a little bit confusing, but all in all, very easy game mechanically. But what I really enjoyed about this system was writing adventures for it. So in the past year, I've written three different adventures for Call of Cthulhu set in Singapore in different time periods. In, I would say, famous haunted places. So the first one was in high school, secondary school. The second one was in Tekong, which for people who are not in Singapore it's like a military island where in Singapore, like, the men go to the all men have to go to the army at 18, and more often than not they end up on this island called Tekong where they do their basic military training. It's like a small island off the coast of Singapore, and they spend 2 months there. And of course, it's, surrounded by forests, and there are like creepy old buildings there. So it's a nesting ground for a lot of horror stories and local folk tales and legends, which is great for a game like Call of Cthulhu. And the third one was Changi Hospital, which is infamously a very haunted hospital in Singapore. What I could appreciate about the Call of Cthulhu system was that even though I'm running these things in Singapore, I don't really have to tap into Cthulhu mythos at all. The game runs without the lore very well. I just need to just don't use Cthulhu mythos at all. And there's a skill called Cthulhu mythos in the actual Call of Cthulhu game that kind of goes up as your campaign goes on and you learn more about the old gods and things like that. And I think that's kind of cool because the more you know about those things, your sanity score also drops. But you can easily run a horror game without that as well, and go nuts with the sanity stuff. But yeah, I really Call of Cthulhu because it's so simple to run. It's a great template. It's a great system for GMs to write their own stuff as well. Very easy to put things in. And yeah, that's the actual Cthulhu mythos itself. Honestly, I feel like it's a little bit pulpy sometimes. I'm not a huge. I like it. It's 1920s. It's fun. It feels like Indiana Jonesy, but it certainly doesn't feel scary for me. Maybe because Asian horror is way crazier than what I've seen in the West. So this kind of stuff doesn't scare me at all in the least. But yeah, I think that would be my kind of main criticism about the setting itself and the lore behind Call of Cthulhu. But some people find it scary. So it's just kind of me. Number one. This is not going to be a surprise for many of my regular players. Delta Green is my favorite game I played last year. Some of you may be thinking it's a bit of a cop-out because Delta Green is basically an offshoot of Call of Cthulhu, so it's like the same game. You're right-ish. I think the one thing that's different that really sticks out to me, the two things that are really different that sticks out to me, that first of all, I really like the sanity rules in Delta Green. In Call of Cthulhu, it touches on it a little bit, but Delta Green codifies it a bit more. So when you lose your sanity, even a single point there is a way for you to offset your sanity loss through bonds. So what are bonds? Bonds are like your husband, your wife, your dog, your church group, whatever it is, your character is attached to in real life, and it puts a strain on that relationship for you when you experience these horrible things. And at the end of the session, during the downtime, when you go back to your normal life, you have to roleplay out how that relationship was strained because you offset some of that sanity loss through that relationship. So maybe, while you were like fighting some demon in the basement somewhere, you missed your kid's birthday, and that has made everyone in your family pissed off at you. But they don't know that you've been out doing these kind of things because it's a secret and you're in a secret quasi-governmental agency that handles all this supernatural stuff. And I think that's great. It helps you ground yourself into the characters so much more. And it is a dark game. It's a very dark game. The themes and the adventures, some of them, they are, let's say, I wouldn't run it for a public table. I would run it for like people I know, and I know who will be okay with this kind of stuff. It's definitely a not safe for work kind of RPG, at least for most of the scenarios. And the other thing I really liked about it was it's mostly in modern day, like today. There is a modern day kind of rule set or supplement for Call of Cthulhu, but I think Delta Green just does it better. It's it's the horror is that despite all the technology that you have and all these things that you all the tools that you have now, like the internet, nuclear weapons, like fucking machine guns, all that kind of stuff, and you're still powerless against whatever is out there. And everything feels more relatable to you because you see it every day. In Call of Cthulhu is the 1920s. You can watch as many 1920 movies as you want. You can, read as many books about 1920s as you want. Rewatch Great Gatsby 10,000 times. But it still doesn't come close to actually living in the era. And when you play Delta Green and especially if I bring in locations that are very familiar to you, it becomes and it feels a lot more real. And I think this is what I experienced with Call of Cthulhu as well when I wrote my own scenarios for Singapore. A lot of the players, it was a lot closer to home, and therefore it was much scarier as well. And that's why I love Delta Green so much. It's just very unique. The scenarios and the written campaigns and scenarios for this game are so unique and so bizarre and so weird and gruesome, and it elicits a real emotion, a real fear from players, which is something that I can appreciate. I don't know, maybe yeah, as a G, I kind of like it when players elicit like true emotions in the game, not just, oh, my character feels brave, or my character feels sorry for this kid. No, I want you to feel sorry. I want you to feel fear, and fear is one of those emotions that this game just pulls out of people, and that's why I really like Delta Green. But anyway, this is my list. Please share yours with me if you would like to in the comments and blah blah blah. And I think I will see you all soon, next year maybe. To all my friends and RPG people, very happy new year and happy holidays. Bye bye.